As some of you may note, I have not been around for a couple of days, and there have been many drops, perhaps 50 or more. Let me back up and just take a look. Yeah, it's about 50 drops. So rather than, both for two reasons, rather than go through them line by line, which I'm sure if you are curious, you have either looked at them yourself or you have watched others' videos, I am frankly not inclined to do that because, first of all, a bunch of that first batch, and part of my reason for not doing it was there was a whole M&M stuff and the rest of this, and frankly, I don't want to spend 6 or 8 hours studying how that stuff all links. It's obviously dark stuff, and we know from Hollywood, we know from the rest of it that there are an awful lot of linkages between Sony, Disney, Hollywood, the CIA, the pedophilic stuff, the whole sex trafficking and the rest of it, and the messages that are being spread by the dark side in order to make things worse and to cause another breakdown in our civilization, frankly. So there are about 4 different pieces of this, and the way I'm going to approach this is how do we see these pieces, and then what is the linkage among the pieces that should tell us what goes on, and finally what do I think where we are. So first one has to do with a whole bunch of pedophilic stuff. It involved the Epstein, it involved the islands, it involves tunnels, it involves sex trafficking, it involves pedophilia. It probably includes satanic stuff. There's a temple on the island, and Epstein is a dark boy that is a convicted pedophile. But the Clintons have been involved. Prince Henry has been involved. I think it's Henry. There are famous people. There are people that probably did not have linkages with sexual conduct, but that were pulled there in order to make it look legitimate, and they may or may not have seen what else was going on. I mean, who knows? There is this linkage to Backpage, which apparently has a bunch to do with pedophilia and perhaps some sex trafficking, and there was a bust in Arizona near Sedona, which happens to coincidentally be a couple miles from where Jock Strap McStain has one of his many houses. And Cindy McCain, I guess I can use her real name, made a bunch of comments about how good it is that this is being busted. One wonders whether they're being busted because of the rest of it's going, or whether they're cheering because it's too close to home. You know, I probably should not cast aspersions in that direction particularly, but it is an interesting juxtaposition to say the least. There is the whole linkage to this pedophilic stuff, this satanic stuff, to government. And why is that the case? Well, because the people who want government to perform in a certain way, who want decisions to be made in a certain way, who want policies to be made, and who want people, elected government officials, to look the other way, and senior executives to look the other way, are using blackmail, pedophilia, sex crimes, homosexuality, corruption, and fear and payoffs to hold these people tight. And it's pretty clear if you've watched Congress for 40 years as I have, it's pretty clear that the independent voices, the statesman-like voices that we used to have no longer exist at all. They are totally gone. Nobody steps out. And even when you get a guy like Chafez, who from Utah, who was one of the big heroes, he was going to audit the Fed, which is at the core of this. Within 2 weeks, he announced his resignation, or that he was going to not run again, and then he resigned, and he's completely out altogether. He wanted to stay home and spend time with his family. Well, they might not have been there if he had followed the process. You've got the second link to all of this is the MSM, Twitter, Jack Dorsey, Suckerface, and the rest of the guys, Facebook. There's a comment in there about @Snowden, hey, give us access, and apparently there is some kind of Snowden still has some linkage either through the 4 a.m. stuff that's going through the MSM or through and among Twitter, Facebook, Google, YouTube, and the rest of these guys. So, and of course CIA is in behind that, and the Media Matters and the rest of it. So the third thing that is the piece, and again, I'm not doing these by number, I'm doing them by subject matter, because this is how I think it makes sense at this point, and frankly going through 50 of these is just a waste of time. A lot of them have to do with Q checking, code checking, safety checking, and then giving us examples. The third one is the border walls, and of course we've talked about that in other sections. The fact that it's linked to these other two, the fact that it has sex traffic, pedophilia, drugs, guns, gangs, Muslim Brotherhood, the whole idea of the porous wall. And you say, well, gee, that's all just loose stuff. No, it's not. It's part of the CIA. It's part of the same program. It's part of breaking things down. It's part of making the government and the operations, the economy in the United States less viable. And everybody that's on the dark side wants that, and they want that because they want to make us weaker. I mean, that sounds absolutely crazy until most of you know where you have followed through and how you see that going. Then, of course, there is the next piece, which is the whole Putin, Syria, Libya, Russia, the whole idea of ISIS, of Al-Qaeda, of us having to fight wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We now have a 17-year war or almost 17-year war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Yes, there was some delay, and yes, the wars didn't officially start then, but they started with 9/11, and so here we are. They started because 9/11 was a false flag that was set up, a bogus banner that was set up for us to trip into that. And of course the Patriot Act, taking away the guns, the Second Amendment is all linked to that. I mean, every time there is one of these events, one has to say, oftentimes one says, well, gee, what were they after? And the first thing you say, well, they were after this. Well, that's not the case. I mean, in the 9/11 thing, there was gold, there were investigations, there was the Pentagon, there was stuff going on in the 17th floor, there were all the investigations, there was the FBI, there were all kinds of pieces to it that fit in, that somebody dovetailed through that to make it all work. And that thing was planned for at least 5 years and perhaps much longer. And why does that fit to the rest of this? Well, it's all part of the same thing. It is exactly part of the same thing. There were comments by Q about uniting and gathering and not fighting, and with Tracy Bean and her march. And, you know, I'm going to, in the next 48 to 72 hours, ask the same thing about a totally different process, which goes to the heart of the same matter, and I'm going to discuss it at the end of this. So the fourth piece of this has to do with McStain and ISIS and the rest of that and how that fits into it. And there were a lot of people that said, well, you know, why is Hussein, the final thing is, why did Hussein have 8 years with ISIS and do nothing? Al-Qaeda, the Al-Shabaab and the rest of these guys, and ISIS, and not get anything done? Why did little Georgie Bush have all of this so-called Al-Qaeda and the rest of that, these Taliban going after him and never be able to do anything, never even get a hold of the bad guy, right, Osama bin Laden, who happens to be a good buddy of family of the Bushes. How did that happen? Well, it happened just the way the Hinckley deal happened with the shooting of Reagan, right? We need somebody to help us out here. And they used Osama bin Laden against the Russians in Afghanistan so they could play games there. So it all goes back to this. There's another comment here, And this is fascinating, which ties in with all of these accidents. It ties in with the shipwrecks. It ties in with the jets. It ties in with the airline accidents, with the with a whole variety of them. And it is Hillary Clinton getting ready to run in New York. And so what happens? Well, John Kennedy Jr. goes down in an airplane, right? And that airplane, there's no real good reason why that plane went down. And I have to tell you, as a pilot myself, it makes no sense on a whole range of deals, any more than having Cessna pilots flying 767s that can pinpoint hit towers at several hundred miles an hour, having never flown one, even if they did simulation. None of that makes any sense. So there are a bunch of comments by the 8chan folks that, gee, this is all tied together because Hussein is actually ISIS, he's actually Muslim, he's tied to Iran, he's tied to the Muslim Brotherhood. And, you know, there may be all of those linkages, but I'm going to tell you it's one piece bigger than that. And that piece that is fomenting all of these little pieces. You say, well, gee, how do we make sense of all these little pieces? Well, all of these little pieces are part of a giant orchestra. Think of the flutes and the clarinets as being played in Libya, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, as the kettle drums are being played in North Korea. You've got the trumpets and the rest of that going on in the false flags in Europe. You've got all, I mean, you know, I don't need to play the whole orchestra, but the point of the matter is that it's going on in every little piece of this. You've got economic downturn, you've got turmoil, you've got fomenting for fights, you've got nuclear problems, you've got heavy equipment, you've got the whole Israel deal, the greater Israel, you've got the Syrian things, you've got immigration, you've got destroying and tearing down the fabric of communities in Europe. And it's all, and you say, well, gee, that doesn't make any sense. Why does that make any sense? Well, let me tell you why it makes sense. It makes sense only because, and this is what it took me so long to get it, only if you realize that the dragons, the big ones, the ones that are not the Iwans, the ISIS, the McStains, the rest of this, but the people behind this all, that everybody since John Kennedy and even before that, clear back to Thomas Jefferson and Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln, there are quotes in each one of those that say there is this evil, dark force that's attempting to run us, and if you knew how dark it was, you would run and hide, you would tear it out, you would turn it upside down. Well, none of them spoke about it well enough to get the job done. And Trump, through Q, apparently, is looking at that big picture. And what you have to look at the spider web, which is part of the comments that are here now, is that all these little pieces, to use a different metaphor, all these little pieces are part of the spider web, and all of these instruments are being played in all these different directions with the intent of making us fearful, making us insecure, problem, reaction, solution, and closing us down. And we have guys like Zbigniew Brzezinski and Kissinger and David Rockefeller and Pike and Haupt and the rest of these guys that go all the way back, that tell us what they're doing. We know what they're doing, and we keep ignoring it. And the point of the matter is that at one level, what I want everybody to appreciate, and what I keep reminding myself, is that you can look at all these little pieces and you can say, well, we need to fix this, we need to fix this. We got SES. Well, SES is, where does that fit into this? It's one little piece, right? Where does it fit? Well, it is something that needs to be fixed, but it's one little piece. So when you look at all of these snakes crawling out of the swamp, and they're going everywhere, and they're global, and they're all over the world, you say, instead of saying, let's go kill all the snakes and hang them and guillotine them, then you have to say, who is sending the snakes? all right? Who is sending the snakes? Because somebody is behind all of this. And it goes back to the bankers. It goes back to the people with the money. The guys like Epstein that have billions of dollars that nobody can figure out how. The guys like Zuckerberg who suddenly end up with this great idea and have billions of dollars of financing and nobody can figure out how. The guy like Soros that always ends up on the right side of some kind of stock market deal or some government deal or whatever, and he makes billions as a result of it. Do you think that that's good luck? Do you think that that's because he's brilliant? It's, you know, if you were an insider, you'd make billions too. That's just the way it works. So there are all of these pages, and these pages have to come together, and the only way that they come together is that the bankers have the money, and the bankers want not just the money. You can say, well, gee, how could they stand to knock the stock market down? How could they stand to take Lehman Brothers out if they really owned a bunch of them? How can they do the rest of that? Well, it's not about a balance sheet, okay? It has nothing to do with a balance sheet. They can take their balance sheet down, and you know what happens is that tomorrow morning, after they've taken everybody's balance sheet down, they've got money to buy back. And as a result, that pie, to play with another metaphor, that pie that they owned half of a week ago, they now own 3/4 of. And that's been happening since 1815 or earlier. It's been happening since the Napoleonic War. And so all of these wars are being fomented to create insecurity, to create better advantage, to disarm people, to move whole populations, to depopulate some, to gain greater financial advantage, to get access to oil and transportation and gas and drugs and the rest of this stuff. And every single one of these things plays into the same regime, which is if we make all of this work, we keep getting more control. And they are at the point of complete control. And that is, the delay in it is that the United States, the citizens of the United States, us little people, have guns. And I hate to say it that way. We also hopefully have feist, right? We have fight. We're not going to be trudged off to the gulags. That's the other part. And we will not allow this to happen. And better yet, we flip it before it goes that way. We flip it. And if Trump is on the right side of this, and I dearly hope that he is, we flip this as a part of it. So that's the end game on those pieces. Now let me go one deeper, and this is a challenge to the whole cue ball stuff. If in fact you've got Epstein nailed, if you've got Rachel Chandler or whatever her name is nailed, and if in fact Hillary Clinton stuff is all locked in, and you know the linkages, and you intimate that you know that she took down Kennedy Jr., and if that's in fact the case, it's murder, you know? It's murder. You've got all this McCain linkage to ISIS. You've got him linked to Ukraine. You've got sellout stuff. You've got him wheeling and dealing, I believe, in Western Russia and in Ukraine and on a bunch of different projects. You've got the Clintons selling out our secrets to China. You've got Obama selling out our secrets to China and North Korea. You've got the CIA as the dark side. If you've got all that stuff, then you know what? Unmask those indictments, arrest these people. If you've got the goods on them, it's not just fun play on YouTube. If you've got the goods on them, it's time, whenever that piece comes together, and it has to come together in the next couple months, it's time to close in. It's time to take it all, and it's time for us as the little people to say, it's got to happen. It's got to happen soon, and when it happens, we will support you. We will say that it's not craziness to go that way. So keep us out of Syria. We don't need to go to Syria. Keep Putin honest. I think he'll stay there. Keep the cooler heads from having stupid nuclear war. Disarm North Korea and Kim Jong-un, and follow on this stuff that you say you've got. If you've got all this stuff, you know, we don't need to wait, and this stuff will unravel. John, stinky jockstrap McStain offered to, apparently, and according to his own statements, offered to give military information if he got to go to the hospital. Well, let's take him to the hospital again, and let's find out what he knows. And let's make it so that he has no choice but to follow through and tell us all the rest of this stuff. Because if in fact he is linked as he appears to be, he knows that ISIS got all of its military equipment and leadership and training from the Obama administration, from the Bush administration, through Hillary Clinton and the Secretary of State, and it's time to round these guys up. So the thing that is heartening about the Q stuff is that there is a grand crescendo, and that grand crescendo is at a place both in terms of taking all these little pieces and fitting them together and helping us look at how this spider web fits. It's bigger than we know. It's still bigger than I know. I know that. I know that it's bigger than I know, okay? And all the rest of you do too. So we know that the pieces link this stuff up. Sorry about the lighting there. We know that the pieces link this up. And what we need to know now is what's going to happen to it, and is Trump actually going to pull the trigger, right? Now, finally, there's one other piece, and there's a bunch of stuff in this Q thing that says, you know, we need to bring back hanging and the rest of that. Well, I've studied it. Yes, there are, I think, 6 states that still allow hanging. There's nobody that allows the guillotine. I'm sorry to tell you. And the United States government uses the state in which the conviction occurs for federal offenses. So if it happens in the United States, they're going to have to charge them in a state that allows for the hangings. But even in those states, the chemical injection and or electrocution are preferred methods. So unless you get somebody to flip the statutes, which is possible, that we could have one state that would say we're going to make it only a priority for a hanging, and for public hanging at that, and we're going to put these other remedies aside, and then we prosecute them in the state of convenience. That would be great. So I challenge you little folks in some state, pick a state, you know, pick Montana or Idaho or Iowa or Arkansas, and change your death penalty statute so that we can charge these people in federal court in that state and then actually have the hangings. Let's get it going, huh? It's time to do it. So that's my little report for today. Thank you so much. If you like it, thumbs up. I'm not going to go through the little pieces one by one. I think we got the big picture, and it's time for us to march on. Let's demand that more happens. And in the next 72 hours, I'm going to give you a petition for the United States President. If they allow us to put that petition in, I'm going to put it before you. I'm going to ask you folks to all sign it, and I'm going to ask you to pass it to everybody else, because it's time to unite the 10 million. It's time for us to all stand up, and it's time to say we will not take no for an answer. All right? Thanks so much.